recording this to provide you with some feedback on the week 14 quiz to give you some responses to the questions that were most commonly answered incorrectly. Overall, though, the quiz was really good. The average score was 8.3, and that includes some people who didn't take it. So 89% of you got 9s and 10s on that, or 8 9s and 10s on that. So that was quite good. But we'll go through the most commonly incorrectly answered questions. And then I'll give you some ideas on how to study for the final exam. Okay, so this question caused people some trouble, and it was a question about the primary function of the G20. And as always, I recommend that you see if you can eliminate some answers first. So the G20, well, we know that the G20 is not about trade agreements, so we can eliminate letter A. That would be something like the World Trade Organization. We also know that the G20 is not specific to a particular geographic region, so that means we can eliminate B. We know that it's not an intergovernmental defense alliance. That would be something like NATO, which we really didn't go into in any detail in this course. So that leaves letter C, designing and coordinating action on a global scale. That's what the G20 does. So that answer is C. Okay, next up, so globalization in the period from 1860 through World War I. So remember, we actually did have some rapid globalization at that time. So what was going on? Well, we did have the rapid growth of international trade. Trade increased a lot then. But trade at that time was dominated by trade between the colonized global south and the colonizers in the north, like the UK. So the UK was the big beneficiary of a lot of trade in the pre-World War I period. So the reduction in numbers of people living in abject poverty, that came much later. So we've talked about that quite a lot in this course, and that has mostly been due to the reduction in poverty in China. And that is a very recent phenomenon, in the 1990s, really starting in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. That's where we really see a lot of people in China lifted out of poverty after China gets most favored nation status at the WTO. So that happened much later. So the answer to this question is B, because the reduction in numbers of people living in poverty happened much later. Okay. Supply chain resilience. So supply chain resilience has become quite an important topic because of the global pandemic and our reliance on China for manufacturing important medical equipment and masks and ventilators and medications. And so this idea of supply chain resilience is not being overly reliant on one particular supply chain. So instead of just having China for your source for masks, you can get some of your masks from China and some of your masks from Mexico. Now we do assume that supply chains will become more regional, but regionalization is not about resilience. Resilience is about building redundancy into your supply chain and having options in your supply chain if one of your suppliers can't deliver. So let's eliminate some of these answers. It wouldn't be A. It's not about the nationalization of supply chains, though that may well happen. And it's not about completely excluding China. We're still going to trade with China. China is a huge manufacturer and a big part of global supply chain. So we're still going to trade with them. And supply chains will become more regional, but that's not all there is to it. So the answer here was B, diversifying your supply chain, having different suppliers. So final question that some people got wrong, or the final most commonly wrongly answered question. Post-pandemic, the world will need stronger international organizations and closer cooperation because, so we can eliminate nationalism protects human rights and national economies. Well, we know that nationalism is actually bad for national economies. We may not want to believe that, but remember, globalization and global trade raises all boats. China has hoarded its supply of medical masks and banned their exports. Well, that's true, but we're not going to control that with closer international cooperation. Citizens should worry about their own citizens first and foremost. Well, we need better global cooperation than that. So the answer is B. Closed borders and travel restrictions don't keep out viruses. So we better figure out how to work together and cooperate globally, because these kinds of things might happen again. So these were all themes that were reflected in this week's readings. So now I'd like to just spend a minute on how to focus for the final. So you should definitely review the reading quiz questions from the second half of the course. Okay, so that's post spring break. You can find those quizzes on Blackboard. The easiest way to access the questions is to go through your quiz in the gradebook. If you got things wrong, you can find the right answers, figure out the right answers by revisiting the material. See, the best way to do it is to figure out the right answer yourself. But you can also watch these announcements that I did each week where I gave you the correct answers to some of the most commonly missed questions. So go ahead and take a look at these announcements. So the review lectures, I'm not going to do review lectures for the second half of the course because you have my recorded lectures. So I can't really see what review lectures would add to that. So watch or re-watch my recorded lectures from the second half of the course. Make sure you've taken notes on important concepts. As you started to do, hopefully, in the first half of the course, you've kept notes on all of your assigned readings so that you can quickly review them and remember what the main points of each reading were. So review your notes from the assigned readings from the second half of the course. The exam is not going to have questions from the readings in the first half of the course, okay? I will do some review videos. I haven't gotten around to that yet, but I will do review videos focusing on the first half of the course and the most important takeaways from the first half of the course. I haven't done it yet, but I'll set up a week 15 practice quiz. Much like we did with the midterm, you'll need to use Respondus Lockdown Browser just to practice with that. And whatever you get on that quiz will count as a little tiny bonus point. And those will actually be live quiz questions from the question bank. That'll be used for the final. And then review the material from discussion sections, not from your breakout groups, of course, but a lot of times the short answer questions and the essay questions will reflect the material we covered in the discussion sections. And then this week's discussion section, you'll really want to make sure you attend this week's discussion section because we will be reviewing for the final exam. I just wanted to remind you about academic integrity. I mean, maybe you feel a little more tempted to cheat because we're in the online environment. But don't forget that GW's Code of Conduct for Students still applies, and perhaps even more so in the online environment. So because I know you can do this anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and let you use your written notes for the exam. Okay, so you shouldn't collaborate with others, you shouldn't Google your answers, you should not have a second computer sitting there open with the lecture notes or anything like that. Okay, so, but you may use your own handwritten notes on the exam, and, that's kind of my nod to the fact that enforcing much else is pretty difficult in the online environment. So that's it. If you have any questions about this announcement video, please let me know. Thanks.